So I work sort of very broadly in computer vision and machine learning, right? Or this is why we're talking, but my specific research has focused on global scale image retrieval or image search. And I've focused particularly on one particular application, which is combating child sexual abuse by recognizing where victims of child sexual abuse are photographed. So I work with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children here in the United States to have an investigative platform where when they are investigating cases of child sexual abuse that it turns out are often taken in hotel rooms, they can recognize what hotel it was taken in. We do some. I think when we work with investigators, they want us to sort of understand what the images look like. But most often, what we see is sort of the sanitized version, where the most sensitive parts have been erased. It turns out this is actually one of the real challenges for the image search. So when we think about how sort of a deep learning based approach to image search works, you take a massive amount of images of all the places you've ever seen before. You learn some representation of those. So for hotels, you're learning what are the patterns that make this Hilton look like this Hilton, or this Motel 6 look like this Motel 6. And now you get a new picture and you say, what are the most similar images, the things that have the most similar patterns? But so in sort of all of vision and machine learning, one of the fundamental concepts is that you want your training data and your testing data to look alike. And if they don't, then your model won't perform very well.
Oh,
And so we have this challenge that we have a huge number of images of hotel rooms. Combined, we've scraped images off of the internet, and then we have a mobile application called Traffic Cam that has 250,000 users. When they travel, they just submit pictures of their hotel room to us. It's an iPhone app or Android app, so anyone when they travel can send pictures of their hotel room. And so we have 12 million images in our data set, and they look sort of like hotel rooms, right? You check into a hotel and you snap a picture of your room. But the victim images don't really necessarily look the same. In particular, the victim typically occludes a very large part of the room that you sort of see. So if you look at my background, you kind of see just the one piece of artwork on the wall or something. And so this is a real challenge for the image retrieval models because your test data looks extremely different from the training data that you have available. So this is what a lot of my research is focused on, is how can we make image retrieval models work in this sort of specific, interesting context. There are other challenges. So there are lots of place recognition challenges in computer vision, things like landmark recognition. I get a picture of the Eiffel Tower. How do I figure out where that was taken? In those sort of landmark recognition problem, there is a geometric consistency that you can sort of rely on, right? Like the Eiffel Tower and the things around it are in the same configuration. They vary as a function of illumination or time of year, or, people passing through. But in hotels, that's not true. The one room in a hotel could have two beds and the other one has a king size bed, or they're maybe on opposite walls, or the hotel's been renovated. And so you're really trying to pick up on sort of very fine features. That lamp on the wall is the same. And it's not something that sort of the standard deep learning approaches to image retrieval do particularly well. So this is what I've worked on for the last 6 years or so of my career. I was lucky enough to be funded by the National Institute of Justice here in the United States to work some on this. And now as a fellow of the Taylor Geospatial Institute, I'm getting to continue working on this and building the investigative platform. No, it's all over. This is actually so when we think about sort of child sexual abuse and human trafficking, it can happen anywhere. And I think we sort of, at least here in the US, there's sort of a picture that you see in the news that there's a wealthy white high schooler who gets trafficked. And that is sometimes what happens, but it can happen to anyone. It is particularly a problem for low income or sort of like not affluent communities, because there is more sort of opportunity for them to end up being at risk. But it happens sort of all around the world in all different sort of levels of society.
Oh,
So it's a huge problem. And I think I feel very lucky to get to work on something that's so important. I also recognize, so it's very easy for me to talk about the good of like, we're combating child sexual abuse or we're combating human trafficking. The reality is we've built a model that can find where people are. And that's a problem. Like there are ethical and sort of moral dilemmas that come from building the model. That it's agnostic to the use case. It doesn't care if you're trying to recognize where a child sexual abuse victim is, or an undocumented immigrant, or a victim of spousal abuse. And so we have really taken it on ourselves to make sure that our system is very locked down and not available broadly. So this is why we have essentially only worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We get I think sometimes I frustrate law enforcement who want to use this, and I am completely unwilling to make it available to individual police departments because I don't have sort of control over how it would get used and necessarily agree with how they might use it. In the case of child sexual abuse, it's very obvious that this is doing something important and good. But I do recognize, and I think this is something I want to be sure is clear to the community, the risk that is inherent to the work that I'm doing of building these tools. There are bad things that could be done with it too. So we build in a lot of protections to make sure there's really limited users who
wow.
have access to this. We keep track of all of the queries that get made to it. So we can make sure that, for example, people aren't sharing their credentials. If individual law enforcement departments contact us, we point them to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Say, if you have a legitimate investigation, they will support you. Some of this is, as a researcher, an academic, it is a challenge to build sort of production software. I don't have the capacity to figure out every user that should have access to this. So we've been really lucky. This is a project it started while I was actually still a PhD student. It was with my advisor, Robert Pless, who was amazingly supportive and kind of let me have free reign to do what I wanted to do. So I appreciate that he let me take this project on. And then another collaborator, actually an academic sibling of mine, Richard Souvenir, who's at Temple University, the three of us, so Robert Pless was my PhD advisor at Washington University in St. Louis. He's now at George Washington University. So Richard Souvenir, and I built this sort of starting in 2016